My husband told me, open relationships are normal, so I gave him one lesson. I am Naomi, 34 years old, and until last month, I thought my 8-year marriage to Jake was everything I had ever dreamed of. Then one evening over dinner, he casually suggested we should try an open relationship because it was normal and healthy for modern couples. I was blindsided, heartbroken, and confused until I discovered his true motivation. What he never expected was that his suggestion would lead to a lesson about respect he would never forget. Before I share how I taught my husband a lesson about respecting our marriage, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button if you want more real stories about relationships and the challenges we face when the people we love disappoint us. I met Jake 9 years ago at an outdoor music festival in Austin. It was one of those perfect summer evenings where the air feels electric with possibilities. I was there with a group of friends dancing near the back of the crowd when I accidentally bumped into him. He spilled his drink, but instead of being upset, he laughed and asked if he could buy me one instead. There was something immediately charming about his easygoing nature and warm smile. Jake worked as an IT engineer for a growing tech company. He was smart, funny, and attentive in a way that made me feel seen. Our first date stretched from coffee into dinner, and by the end of the night, I knew there was something special between us. We dated for a year before he proposed during a weekend trip to the coast, and I said yes without hesitation. The first 5 years of our marriage were wonderful. We bought a small house in the suburbs with a yard big enough for the children we planned to have someday. Jake surprised me with weekend getaways on our anniversaries. We hosted game nights with friends, took cooking classes together, and built a life that felt secure and loving. I taught 4th grade at a local elementary school and often came home with funny stories about my students that would make Jake laugh until tears came to his eyes. Every relationship has its challenges, of course. We disagreed about finances occasionally and bickered about household chores like any normal couple, but we always resolved our differences through honest communication. Jake was my best friend, my confidant, and my partner in everything. I truly believed we were one of those rare couples who had figured out the secret to lasting happiness. About a year ago, I began noticing subtle changes in our relationship. Jake started working later hours, claiming his team was under pressure to finish an important project. Business trips that used to be rare became monthly occurrences. When he was home, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and stepping outside to take calls. Our physical intimacy decreased gradually. What used to be a natural and frequent expression of our love became scheduled and perfunctory. Jake would often claim he was too tired or stressed from work. At first, I attributed these changes to normal ebbs and flows in a long-term relationship, but a persistent worry began to gnaw at me. I tried everything I could think of to bring back the spark. I prepared his favorite meals, suggested weekend trips to places we had enjoyed in the past, and even bought new lingerie to surprise him. While Jake seemed appreciative of my efforts, the distance between us continued to grow. Still, I clung to my belief that we had a strong foundation and that this was just a phase we needed to work through. My friend Amanda was the first to voice concerns about the changes in Jake's behavior. We met for lunch one Tuesday during my school break, and after listening to me describe the situation, she gently suggested that Jake might be hiding something. I hate to say this, Naomi, but these are classic signs that something else might be going on, she said, stirring her iced tea uncomfortably. I immediately defended Jake. No, it is not like that. He has always been honest with me. His company is just going through a growth phase, and he is taking on more responsibility. Things will settle down soon. Amanda raised her eyebrows but didn't push the issue. I hope you are right. Just remember that you deserve someone who makes you a priority. I changed the subject, telling her about my 4th graders and their hilarious science projects. Teaching had always been my passion, and my students provided a welcome distraction from my worries at home. Their enthusiasm and unfiltered perspectives on the world reminded me daily of the joy in simple things. Despite my outward optimism, Amanda's words lingered in my mind. Could Jake be hiding something? I dismissed the thought, repeatedly ashamed for even considering it. After all, Jake had never given me any real reason to doubt him before. We had built our relationship on trust and honesty. I convinced myself that my imagination was running wild and that I needed to have more faith in our marriage. After weeks of minimal quality time together, Jake surprised me by suggesting we go to dinner at Luciano's, the Italian restaurant, where we had celebrated our first wedding anniversary. I was thrilled, taking it as a sign that he was finally emerging from his work-induced fog and recommitting to our relationship. I spent extra time getting ready that Friday evening, choosing a navy blue dress Jake had once complimented and styling my hair the way he liked. When he came home from work and saw me, his eyes widened appreciatively. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. The familiar scent of his cologne brought back memories of happier times, and I felt a surge of hope that our connection was being rekindled. The restaurant was just as charming as I remembered, with soft lighting and the rich aroma of garlic and herbs in the air. We were seated at a quiet corner table, and Jake ordered a bottle of the Chianti we had enjoyed on our anniversary. As we sipped our wine and shared an antipasto platter, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in months. Jake asked about my students and laughed at my story about the classroom guinea pig escape that had caused chaos that morning. Just as our main courses arrived, Jake cleared his throat and set down his fork. "Naomi, there is something I have been wanting to discuss with you." "What is it?" I asked, my heart quickening with anticipation. Perhaps he was finally going to acknowledge the distance between us and suggest ways to reconnect. Jake took a long sip of wine before continuing. "I have been doing a lot of reading lately about modern relationships and how they are evolving. There is this podcast I have been listening to that talks about how traditional monogamy is actually quite restrictive and how many couples are finding greater fulfillment through more open arrangements." I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "What do you mean by open arrangements?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling about his answer. "Well, open relationships," Jake said, leaning forward with an enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. "It is actually becoming quite common. Couples who have been together for a long time often find that allowing each other the freedom to explore connections with other people actually strengthens their primary relationship. It is all about honesty and communication." The pasta in my mouth suddenly tasted like cardboard. I forced myself to swallow before responding. "Are you saying you want us to see other people?" "Not exactly," Jake replied quickly. "You would still be my wife, my primary partner. We would still be committed to each other above anyone else. It would just be about having the freedom to explore other connections when the opportunity arises." The restaurant around us seemed to fade away as I processed what Jake was suggesting. After 8 years of what I thought was a happy monogamous marriage, my husband was proposing that we should start seeing other people. The betrayal cut deep, leaving me speechless for several long moments. "I love you, Naomi," Jake continued, apparently interpreting my silence as consideration rather than shock. "This is not about any dissatisfaction with you or our marriage. It is about growth and exploration. Many couples find it actually brings them closer." "Which couples?" I finally managed to ask. "Do we know anyone in an open relationship?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Well, not personally, but it is becoming more common in progressive circles. Mark from work and his wife have been doing it for a while, and he says it has been transformative for them." I had met Mark exactly once at a company holiday party and remembered him as the loud, somewhat obnoxious guy who had spent most of the evening talking about cryptocurrency. He hardly seemed like a relationship expert worth emulating. "I thought we were happy," I said quietly, fighting back tears. "I thought what we had was enough for you." We are happy, Jake insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away before he could touch me. This is not about you not being enough. It is about embracing a more evolved view of relationships. It is perfectly normal to want variety and new experiences even when you love someone. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur of tension and awkward silence. Jake attempted to revive the conversation several times, but I could barely respond beyond one-word answers. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of our recent history, searching for signs I might have missed, clues that would have prepared me for this moment. When we arrived home, I went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and allowed myself to cry silently. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering if Jake no longer found me attractive or interesting. Had I changed? Had he? Or had our entire relationship been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what we both wanted? Later that night, as we lay in bed, with what felt like an ocean of space between us, Jake tried again. I did not mean to upset you, he said into the darkness. I just thought we could discuss this as adults. Like I said, it is a natural evolution for many relationships. Natural for who? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. We never talked about anything like this before we got married. You never once mentioned wanting an open relationship during 8 years together. People change, relationships evolve, he replied. I am just being honest about my feelings. Isn't that what you always say you want from me? Honesty. Honesty from the beginning, not honesty that conveniently appears when you want something new, I said. Jake sighed. Look, I am not saying we have to decide anything tonight. Just think about it, okay? You will always be my priority, Naomi. This would just be something extra for both of us. I turned away from him, pulling the covers tightly around me. I need time to process this. Of course, he said, sounding relieved that I hadn't outright rejected the idea. Take all the time you need. As Jake fell asleep beside me, I lay awake for hours, tears silently soaking my pillow. Something about this entire situation felt wrong beyond just the shock of the suggestion itself. There was a calculated quality to Jake's approach, as if he had rehearsed his arguments. And why now, after years of apparent contentment with monogamy? The question haunted me as I finally drifted into a restless sleep. In the days following Jake's unexpected proposal at dinner, I began noticing details that I had previously overlooked or dismissed. Small things that had seemed innocuous suddenly took on new significance in light of his suggestion about opening our marriage. Jake had always been casual about his phone, often leaving it on the coffee table or kitchen counter without concern. Now, however, I realized it was perpetually in his pocket or face down beside him. He had added a passcode recently, claiming it was a new company security policy. When notifications came through, he would quickly check them and often step into another room to respond. One evening, while Jake was showering, his phone lit up with a message on the nightstand. I didn't mean to look, but the name caught my attention, Karen from IT. Something about it struck me as odd, especially since Jake had never mentioned a Karen from his department before. The preview showed only the first few words, "Can't wait to see you, Tom." When Jake emerged from the bathroom, I casually asked, "Who is Karen from IT? I do not think you have mentioned her before." Jake's expression flickered briefly before settling into casual indifference. "New team member, we are working on the server migration together." "Must be important if you are texting about it at 10 at night," I remarked. "This project has everyone working crazy hours," he replied smoothly, retrieving his phone and slipping it into his pocket. Another pattern I began to notice was Jake's new habit of showering immediately upon returning home from what he called working late. He would barely greet me before heading straight to the bathroom, something he had never done before. His explanation was that the office air conditioning made him feel grimy, but the consistency of this new routine raised questions in my mind. Unable to contain my growing suspicions, I arranged an emergency lunch with Amanda and invited our mutual friend Lauren, who worked as a family law attorney. I needed perspectives from people who knew me well, but could still be objective about the situation. We met at a quiet cafe where we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. After recounting Jake's dinner proposition and the subsequent behavioral changes I had noticed, I looked to my friends for guidance. Amanda's eyes had narrowed progressively throughout my story. Naomi, I hate to say this, but it sounds like Jake already has someone specific in mind for this open relationship, possibly someone he is already involved with. Lauren, ever the pragmatist, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. From a legal perspective, I should point out that if he is already seeing someone, that constitutes infidelity, regardless of what he calls it, retroactively. If you are considering your options, that could be relevant. I am not thinking about divorce, I said quickly, though the word hung in the air between us. I just want to understand what is happening. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe he genuinely is interested in exploring this lifestyle. Even as I said it, the words felt hollow. There is only one way to know for sure, Amanda said, stirring her coffee decisively. You need to find out if he is already seeing someone. Lauren nodded in agreement. Information is power, Naomi. Before you make any decisions about how to respond to his suggestion, you should know exactly what you are dealing with. Are you suggesting I spy on my husband? I asked, the very idea making me uncomfortable. This was not who we were as a couple. We trusted each other. Or at least we used to. I am suggesting you verify whether your trust has been misplaced, Amanda replied gently. For your own peace of mind. That conversation left me torn between my instinct to trust the man I had loved for 9 years and the growing mountain of evidence suggesting that trust might be misplaced. I wrestled with the moral implications of investigating my own husband, but ultimately, my need for truth won out. The following Thursday, Jake mentioned he would be working late again on an urgent server issue. Instead of acknowledging this with my usual resigned acceptance, I formulated a plan. After he left for work that morning, I called in sick to school, something I rarely did. I spent the day alternating between periods of intense guilt and steely resolve. At 6:30 that evening, I parked my car a block away from Jake's office and waited. At 7:15, I watched as he exited the building and walked not to his car, but down the street in the opposite direction. My heart pounding, I followed at a safe distance. 3 blocks later, Jake entered a trendy bistro that we had never visited together. Through the large front windows, I watched as he approached a table where a woman with striking red hair waited. The smile that spread across his face as he greeted her with a lingering kiss on the cheek was one I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I took several photos with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I feared the images would be blurred. I didn't confront them. Instead, I returned to my car and drove home, my vision occasionally blurring with tears that I refused to let fall. This was not the time for emotional collapse. I needed more information. The next day, while Jake was at work, I did something I had never done before. I logged into our shared computer and accessed Jake's email account, which he had thoughtlessly remained logged into. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Conversations with someone named Bella, dating back nearly 4 months. The emails started professionally enough, apparently related to a project they were collaborating on, but gradually evolved into flirtatious exchanges and eventually explicit messages about their encounters. What hit me hardest was an email from 3 weeks ago where Jake mentioned that he was working on convincing his wife about open relationships so they wouldn't have to be so careful anymore. The timestamp on that email was just 2 days before our dinner at Luciano's. The truth was undeniable. Jake's suggestion about opening our marriage wasn't about relationship evolution or modern approaches to commitment. It was a calculated attempt to legitimize an affair that was already happening. He wasn't inviting me to join him on a journey of mutual exploration. He was asking me to give him permission to continue cheating without the inconvenience of sneaking around. The realization brought a strange clarity. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but now accompanied by a cold anger that crystallized my thoughts. I needed to decide what to do with this information, and I knew I couldn't let Jake's betrayal go unanswered. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling as Jake snored peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his carefully constructed deception had been exposed. By morning, I had cycled through every possible reaction: tearful confrontation, immediate divorce, pretending I knew nothing while consulting attorneys. None of these options felt right. I wanted Jake to understand the full impact of his betrayal. I wanted him to feel the same shock and humiliation that had washed over me when I realized what he was doing. Most of all, I wanted him to recognize that I deserved better than to be manipulated and lied to by the person who had vowed to honor and respect me. As Jake left for work with his customary quick kiss on my cheek, an idea began to form in my mind. If he wanted an open relationship so badly, perhaps I should give him exactly what he asked for, just not in the way he expected. After calling in sick to school for the second day in a row, I contacted Sophia, a friend from college, who I had stayed loosely in touch with over the years. Sophia worked as a marriage counselor and relationship psychologist with a private practice in the city. She had always been known for her direct approach and unwavering principles. In college, she had been the friend who would tell you exactly what you needed to hear, not what you wanted to hear. Sophia and I had never been extremely close, but we respected each other. She had been married and divorced before 30, an experience that had informed her professional path and given her valuable insights into relationship dynamics. She was also strikingly beautiful, with a confidence that commanded attention in any room. More importantly, she had a strong moral compass and zero tolerance for dishonesty. I asked if we could meet for coffee, explaining that I needed professional advice about my marriage. Sophia agreed immediately, and 3 hours later, we were sitting in a quiet corner of a cafe far from both our workplaces. "I have to say, I was surprised to hear from you," Sophia said after we had exchanged initial pleasantries. "Your social media suggests you and Jake have the perfect marriage." "Social media lies," I replied simply before launching into the full story of Jake's suggestion and my subsequent discovery of his affair with Bella. Sophia listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to indignation as I spoke. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "First, I am so sorry you are going through this. What Jake is doing is not just cheating, it is gaslighting. He is trying to manipulate you into accepting his behavior by reframing it as progressive and modern." "Exactly," I said, relieved that someone understood precisely what had bothered me most about the situation. "And I want him to understand how that feels." I explained my nascent plan to pretend to accept Jake's proposal for an open relationship, but with conditions that would force him to confront the reality of what he was asking for. "I need your help, Sophia. Not as a therapist, but as a friend, and maybe a bit as an actress." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" I outlined my idea. I would tell Jake I was open to trying this new arrangement, but with the stipulation that we would meet each other's new partners. I would then introduce him to Sophia, presenting her as my potential new relationship. "Your role would be to help him understand exactly what he is doing from a psychological perspective, to make him face the consequences of his actions in a way that a direct confrontation from me never could." Sophia considered the proposal carefully. "This is unorthodox, and as a therapist, I would normally never recommend this approach. But as your friend—" She paused, then nodded decisively. "I think Jake needs a wake-up call. I am in with one condition: we keep this ethical. No lying about who I am, no pretending we are actually involved romantically. I will play the role of the potential new partner who happens to be a relationship expert, unafraid to call out manipulative behavior." We spent the next hour refining the details. Sophia suggested we meet at a high-end restaurant where Jake would be less likely to make a scene. We agreed on a date the following week, giving me time to set up the scenario with Jake. That evening, when Jake returned home, I was waiting with a glass of wine and a carefully practiced expression of thoughtful acceptance. I have been thinking about what you said about open relationships. I began as we sat in the living room. I have done some reading of my own, and while it was not something I had considered before, I am willing to try if it is important to you. The look of surprised delight on Jake's face would have been comical under different circumstances. Really? That is great, Naomi. I really think this could be good for both of us. I have some conditions, though. I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Complete transparency. We tell each other about anyone we are interested in pursuing. No secrets. Jake nodded eagerly. Of course. Honesty is the foundation of making this work. The irony of his statement was not lost on me. And we meet each other's partners before anything physical happens. I need to know who you are spending time with, and you should know the same about me. This condition seemed to give Jake brief pause, but his enthusiasm quickly overrode any hesitation. That makes sense. It is about building trust, right? Exactly, I replied, raising my glass in a toast. To new experiences. Jake clinked his glass against mine, entirely unaware that he had just agreed to a scenario that would expose his deception. To new experiences. Over the next few days, Jake wasted no time in mentioning that he had a potential connection with someone from work. He was careful not to reveal it was Bella, describing her vaguely as someone from the marketing department who he had only recently gotten to know. Each lie strengthened my resolve. When I mentioned that I too had met someone I was interested in exploring a connection with, Jake's reaction was illuminating. His smile faltered, and a flash of what looked distinctly like jealousy crossed his face. Already? He asked, trying and failing to sound casual. Who is he? You will meet them soon. I replied deliberately, using the gender-neutral term. I have arranged for dinner next Friday. Does that work for your schedule? Jake agreed, though I could tell he was unsettled by how quickly I had embraced the arrangement he had proposed. He had clearly expected resistance tears, or at the very least a long period of adjustment before I would consider seeing someone else. My apparent eagerness had thrown him off balance exactly as I had intended. The evening of our dinner arrived, and I prepared with meticulous care. I chose a black dress that was elegant without being overtly sexy, wanting to present myself as confident rather than competing for attention. Jake seemed unusually quiet as he got ready, repeatedly adjusting his tie and checking his phone. Nervous? I asked, applying a final touch of lipstick. No, why would I be nervous? Jake replied too quickly. Just want to make a good impression on your friend. I had arranged to meet Sophia at the restaurant separately, telling Jake I wanted her to arrive first to avoid any awkwardness. In reality, I needed time to brief her on Jake's most recent behavior and ensure we were aligned on our approach. Sophia was waiting at the bar when I arrived. She looked stunning in a fitted red dress that exuded confidence and professionalism simultaneously. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant style that emphasized her strong facial features and intelligent eyes. I knew immediately that Jake would find her attractive, which was part of the plan. It was important that he see her as someone desirable enough to be a realistic partner for me. Ready for this? She asked after hugging me hello. As ready as I will ever be, I replied. Thank you again for doing this. Sometimes people need a mirror held up to their behavior, Sophia said. Consider me your mirror holder for the evening. We were seated at our table just minutes before Jake was due to arrive. I had deliberately chosen a semi-private alcove that would allow for conversation without the risk of being overheard by other diners. When Jake walked in, I watched his expression carefully. He scanned the restaurant, spotted me, and began walking toward our table with a confident stride. As he got closer and realized I was sitting with a woman rather than the man he had clearly expected, confusion flickered across his face. When he reached the table, he paused momentarily, speechless. "Jake, this is Sophia," I said, gesturing to my friend. "Sophia, my husband Jake." Jake recovered quickly, extending his hand with his most charming smile. "Nice to meet you, Sophia. Naomi has told me. Well, very little, actually." Sophia shook his hand firmly, holding it perhaps a second longer than necessary as she assessed him with a direct gaze. "The pleasure is mine. Naomi has told me quite a bit about you." As Jake took his seat, I could see him recalibrating his expectations for the evening. He had clearly anticipated meeting a potential male rival, someone he could size up and perhaps intimidate subtly. Finding himself instead faced with an attractive, confident woman had clearly thrown him off script. "So, how did you two meet?" Jake asked, reaching for his water glass. "We were in college together," I replied truthfully. "Sophia is a relationship psychologist now. She specializes in marriage counseling and couples therapy." Jake nearly choked on his water. "A relationship therapist. That is interesting." Sophia smiled. "Yes, I find human relationships fascinating, particularly how people rationalize their behavior when they want something that conflicts with their stated values." The waiter arrived to take our drink orders, providing Jake with a momentary reprieve from Sophia's pointed comment. Once our drinks were ordered, however, she wasted no time in steering the conversation exactly where we had planned. "So, Jake, Naomi tells me you recently suggested opening your marriage. I would love to hear your perspective on why you think that would enhance your relationship." Jake glanced at me with a flash of betrayal, clearly having expected a social dinner rather than what was beginning to feel like an interrogation. Nevertheless, he launched into his rehearsed speech about evolving relationship models and the natural desire for variety. Sophia listened attentively, nodding occasionally. When Jake finished, she set down her wine glass deliberately. "That is an interesting perspective. In my professional experience, there are two types of people who suggest opening previously monogamous relationships. The first are those who have genuinely done the emotional work to understand what they are asking for, including the impact on their partner and the significant challenges of managing multiple ethical relationships." She paused, her gaze level. "The second type are those who want the freedom to pursue other people without losing the security of their primary relationship. Often these individuals have already violated the boundaries of monogamy and are seeking retroactive permission. In your case, Jake, which category would you say you fall into?" The directness of her question left Jake visibly flustered. He reached for his drink, buying time before responding. "I would say the first, obviously. This is about mutual growth and exploration." "Interesting," Sophia replied. "And what resources have you consulted to prepare for this transition? What books on polyamory have you read? What boundaries have you and Naomi established? How have you prepared to handle jealousy, scheduling conflicts, or the complex emotions that arise when your spouse is intimate with someone else?" Jake's confident facade began to crack under this barrage of specific questions. "Well, I have listened to several podcasts and read some articles online. We are still working out the details of boundaries." "I see," Sophia said in a tone that made it clear she saw right through him. "And what specific growth opportunities do you hope this arrangement will provide for Naomi? How do you imagine it enhancing her life and happiness?" It was evident that Jake had given little thought to how an open relationship might benefit me as opposed to simply accommodating his desires. As he stumbled through a vague answer about freedom and new experiences, I decided it was time to move to the next phase of our plan. "Jake," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "there is something I need to ask you. Does the name Bella mean anything to you?" The color drained from Jake's face. He looked from me to Sophia and back again, clearly trying to assess how much I knew and how to respond. "She is someone from work," he managed finally. "Red hair, works in marketing, meets you for dinner when you tell me you are working late." I continued retrieving my phone and placing it on the table between us. The woman you have been seeing for the past 4 months based on the emails I found. Jake's mouth opened and closed silently. For perhaps the first time since I had known him, he was completely at a loss for words. I do not understand, Jake finally said, his voice low. You have been spying on me. I have been discovering the truth, I corrected him. A truth you tried to hide by suggesting we open our marriage as a cover for your affair. Sophia leaned forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the personal nature of the confrontation unfolding. Jake, what Naomi has described is not an open relationship. Open relationships are built on honesty, consent, and mutual respect. What you have been engaging in is infidelity, followed by manipulation. Jake's expression hardened as he looked at Sophia. With all due respect, this is between me and my wife. I do not know who you really are, but this is not your business. Actually, I interjected, I asked Sophia to be here precisely because this is her business. She is not my new partner, as you probably assumed. She is my friend who happens to be an expert in relationship ethics, and she is here to help us have an honest conversation about what you have done. I removed my phone from my purse and pulled up the photos I had taken of Jake and Bella at the bistro, along with screenshots of several of their email exchanges. I slid the phone across the table to him. 4 months, Jake. 4 months of lying to my face every day. 4 months of pretending to work late while you were with her. And then you had the audacity to suggest that we open our marriage as if it was some progressive step for us rather than a convenient way to continue your affair without the inconvenience of sneaking around. Jake stared at the evidence on my phone, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. It was not supposed to happen, he finally said. Bella and I were just colleagues at first. One late night at the office led to drinks and things progressed. I never meant to hurt you. Yet you continued seeing her for months, I pointed out. And rather than being honest with me, you constructed an elaborate lie about wanting an open relationship. Sophia interjected with precision. Jake, in my professional experience, people who genuinely want ethical non-monogamy approach the conversation very differently. They discuss the possibility before acting on any attractions to others. They provide their partners with resources to understand what they are proposing. They prioritize their partner's emotional well-being throughout the process. What you did was use the language of ethical non-monogamy to disguise unethical behavior. Several diners at nearby tables were beginning to glance our way, clearly aware that an intense conversation was taking place. Jake noticed this too and lowered his voice to a harsh whisper. So this whole dinner was a setup to what humiliate me publicly? No, I replied calmly. This dinner was arranged to show you exactly what you were asking of me. You wanted me to sit across from your lover and pretend to be okay with it all, while you lied about how long you had been seeing her. I wanted you to experience what that would feel like to sit across from someone you believed I might be intimate with. The difference is, I was honest about who Sophia is. You are still lying about Bella. Jake's defenses began to crumble. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I had seen countless times during our marriage. What do you want from me, Naomi? An apology. Fine, I am sorry. I should have been honest. An apology is a start, I acknowledged. But what I really want is for you to understand what you have done. Not just the cheating, but the manipulation. You tried to make me believe that I was somehow old-fashioned or limiting your growth by expecting fidelity, something we had both committed to. You made me question my own values and expectations, all to accommodate your betrayal. The psychological term for that is gaslighting, Sophia added quietly. It is a form of emotional abuse. Jake flinched at the word abuse, finally seeming to grasp the gravity of his actions. I never thought of it that way, he admitted, his voice losing its defensive edge. I did not know how to handle the situation once it started. You could have chosen honesty at any point, I reminded him. Instead, you chose deception until you were caught. The three of us sat in tense silence for a moment. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal evening service servers, moving efficiently between tables, the soft clink of glasses and cutlery providing a surreal backdrop to the disintegration of my marriage. Finally, I straightened my shoulders and looked directly at Jake. I need time to decide what happens next. Tonight, I want you to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for a week. I need space to think without your presence influencing my decision. You are asking me to leave our home. Jake looked genuinely shocked, as if it had never occurred to him that his actions might have such concrete consequences. Yes, I replied firmly. I am. Where am I supposed to go? That is not my problem right now, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. Perhaps Bella has a spare room. Jake's face flushed at this suggestion. Naomi, please. We can work this out. I will end things with Bella. It was a mistake. A 4-month-long mistake that you only regret because you got caught, I observed. I need time, Jake. 1 week. Then we can talk about whether there is anything left to save. Jake looked from me to Sophia, perhaps hoping she would intervene on his behalf. Instead, she simply nodded in agreement with my request. A period of separation is often valuable after a betrayal of trust, she confirmed. It gives both parties space to process their emotions and consider their options clearly. Realizing he was outnumbered, Jake finally nodded in resignation. 1 week, he agreed. But promise me, you will at least consider forgiving me. 8 years, Naomi. 8 years should count for something. They do count, I assured him, feeling the first tears of the evening threatening to fall. That is why this hurts so much, and that is why I need time to decide if what we had is worth trying to rebuild. As Jake left the restaurant, shoulders slumped in defeat, Sophia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You did well, she said. That took immense courage. What happens now? I asked, suddenly feeling adrift without the focus of confronting Jake. Now, Sophia said gently, you begin the hard work of healing, regardless of whether you decide to stay in the marriage or leave. And you remember that you deserve someone who respects you enough to be honest even when the truth is difficult. As we paid the bill and prepared to leave, I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. The marriage I thought I had was gone, but in its place was a clear-eyed understanding of my own worth and boundaries. Whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I had stood up for myself when it mattered most. The week after Jake moved out was one of the most difficult periods of my life. The initial adrenaline from the confrontation faded, leaving me with a hollow ache that seemed to permeate every corner of our home. I took several more days off from school, grateful for an understanding principal who knew only that I was dealing with family issues. The house felt simultaneously too empty and too full of memories. I would find myself staring at our wedding photos, wondering if Jake had been genuinely happy then, or if he had always harbored a restlessness that would eventually lead him astray. I slept on the couch most nights, unable to face our bed alone, yet unwilling to smell his lingering cologne on the pillows. Amanda and Lauren formed a rotation of support, ensuring I was never alone for too long. They brought meals, listened without judgment, and gently encouraged me to consider all my options for the future. Lauren provided practical advice about legal protections I might need, regardless of my ultimate decision, while Amanda simply held space for my grief and anger. Sophia, true to her professional ethics, recommended a colleague for formal therapy rather than attempting to serve as both friend and counselor. I began seeing Dr. Martin twice weekly, using those sessions to process not just Jake's betrayal, but also my own patterns in relationships. Why had I been so quick to dismiss the early warning signs? What made me so afraid to confront the changes in our marriage directly? Jake maintained his distance physically as requested, but sent daily text messages ranging from profuse apologies to nostalgic reminiscences about our happier times. 3 days after moving out, he sent confirmation that he had ended things with Bella completely, along with a screenshot of an appointment he had made with a therapist specializing in infidelity recovery. 5 days into our separation, a handwritten letter arrived, 12 pages of Jake's distinctive scrawl detailing every step of his relationship with Bella, how it had begun innocently, but evolved due to his own failure to maintain appropriate boundaries. He acknowledged using the open relationship suggestion as a way to legitimize his affair, rather than face the consequences of his actions. Most significantly, he took full responsibility without making excuses or blaming external factors. I betrayed not just our vows, he wrote toward the end, but the foundation of respect that made our relationship special. I manipulated you instead of being honest, and in doing so, I disrespected your agency and intelligence. I do not expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I see clearly now what I have done. The letter affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. It was the first time since discovering the affair that I felt Jake truly understood the nature of his betrayal. Not just the physical infidelity, but the emotional manipulation that had accompanied it. Throughout this period, I focused intensely on my own healing and self-discovery. I resumed my daily morning runs, something I had neglected in recent months. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. I began journaling extensively, pouring out my thoughts and feelings in a way that helped clarify my own needs and boundaries. Most importantly, I began rebuilding my sense of self-worth. For too long, I had defined myself primarily as Jake's wife, measuring my value by the success of our relationship. With that foundation shaken, I was forced to recognize my intrinsic worth, independent of my marital status. On the afternoon of the 7th day, I called Jake and asked him to meet me at a neutral location, a coffee shop we had frequented early in our relationship. He arrived 15 minutes early, visibly nervous, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he had been sleeping no better than I had. "Thank you for meeting me," I began after we had settled at a corner table with our drinks. "I have been doing a lot of thinking this week." "So have I," Jake replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Naomi, before you say anything, I need you to know how sorry I am. The therapy I have started has helped me see how selfish and destructive my behavior was. I know I have no right to ask for another chance, but if there is any possibility—" I held up my hand to pause his plea. "I have made a decision, but before I share it, I need to tell you what this week has been like for me." Jake nodded, settling back to listen. "When I discovered your affair, I felt like my entire reality had been a lie. Every memory was suddenly suspect. Every moment of happiness seemed possibly fake. That is what infidelity does. It does not just damage the present, it retroactively changes the past." Jake winced but maintained eye contact, accepting my words without defense. Through therapy and a lot of soul-searching, I have realized that I do not want to throw away 8 years based on 4 months of terrible decisions. But I also cannot simply go back to how things were and pretend this never happened. Hope flickered in Jake's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am willing to try to rebuild our marriage, but on entirely new terms. Complete transparency. Couples therapy weekly. Individual therapy for both of us. No contact with Bella whatsoever, which may mean you need to consider a department transfer, or even a new job." Jake nodded eagerly at each condition. "Yes to all of that, whatever it takes." "I also need time," I continued. "You can move back into the house, but we will be using the guest bedroom for now." Physical intimacy will need to be rebuilt slowly along with trust. Of course, Jake agreed. I understand completely. And one more thing, I added, meeting his gaze steadily. If anything like this ever happens again, there will be no discussion, no negotiation. I will be gone, and the divorce papers will follow. Jake reached across the table hesitantly, extending his hand palm up. After a moment's consideration, I placed my hand in his. I promise you, Naomi, never again. I almost lost the most important person in my life because I was too selfish and cowardly to appreciate what I had. I will spend every day working to be worthy of this second chance. I did not tell him that I was still uncertain whether our marriage would survive this breach. That despite my willingness to try, I harbored significant doubts about whether trust once so thoroughly broken could ever be fully restored. Those uncertainties would be part of our journey forward to be addressed honestly as they arose. The weeks and months that followed were challenging in ways I had never imagined. We attended therapy diligently, both together and separately. We established new rituals of connection, including technology-free evenings and weekly check-ins about the state of our relationship. Jake transferred to the different department to avoid any contact with Bella, though I later learned she had also moved on to a new company. Healing was not linear. There were days when a random trigger, like a text notification on Jake's phone, would send me spiraling into anxiety. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I had made the right choice in staying. There were arguments when old hurts resurfaced and threatened to derail our progress. But there were also moments of genuine reconnection, conversations deeper than any we had shared in years, a new appreciation for the fragility of trust and the effort required to maintain it. Slowly, hesitantly, we began building something that in some ways felt stronger than what had existed before, precisely because it acknowledged our capacity for both harm and healing. 6 months after our confrontation dinner with Sophia, Jake and I returned to the same restaurant, this time just the two of us. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed since that night. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, noticing my momentary reverie. "I am thinking about the lessons we have learned," I replied honestly. "About how sometimes the most painful experiences can also be the most transformative." "I never would have chosen this path," Jake admitted, "but I am grateful every day that you were strong enough to hold me accountable, rather than simply walking away. You gave me the chance to become a better man, and I will never take that for granted." Whether our marriage would ultimately survive remained an open question, one that only time would answer. But I had learned something invaluable through this ordeal. My worth was not determined by Jake's fidelity or our marital status. I had discovered a strength within myself that would sustain me regardless of the outcome. The most important relationship I had recovered was not with Jake, but with myself. I had learned to trust my instincts, to establish firm boundaries, and to require respect rather than merely hoping for it. These lessons came at a tremendous cost, but they were priceless nonetheless. As I look back on this journey now, I understand that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to demand better from those who claim to love us. Not through ultimatums or manipulation, but through a clear-eyed insistence on truth and respect as non-negotiable foundations for any relationship worth having. Have you ever had to teach someone an important lesson about respect in a relationship? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about navigating the complexities of love and betrayal. Thank you for listening, and remember that you deserve nothing less than complete honesty from those who claim to love you.